Very good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for joining us for Scale Up Malaysia partner sessions, where we talk to some industry players and partners who are joining us for our third cohort and get to know them a little bit more deeply and in depth and see how they can help your business moving forward. Today, we've got a fantastic show for you. We've got some two great companies that are joining us. In fact, our partner for Scale Up Malaysia Cohort 3 is Amazon Web Services, or AWS. They'll be joining us for today's session, but they also asked us to invite a friend over. And so we've got the founder of Jirnexu who's joining us for today's session. So the partnership since we do for Scale Up Malaysia is a great way for us to kind of meet with you, interact with you. We've been really enjoying the sessions over the last month or so. And one of the key important things about these sessions is the live feedback. And so if you've got any questions at any time during the session, please feel free to go to the comment section either on YouTube, on Facebook, or on LinkedIn, and ask the question there. We'll feed it to the panel, and if it's a great question, we'll ask it live and put the guys on the spot. So we've got two companies today. First one is Amazon Web Services, which started in 2000. Amazon itself in 2000 was an e-commerce company coping with scale problems. It struggled with the monolithic technology, and could not build applications at scale to the likes of the retail companies online. They invested lots of R&D and funding, added more developers in the fray, and then when they fixed it, and they realized that there was an interesting product that could be rolled out. So in 2003, they realized the infrastructure that they built for Amazon itself could actually help them scale their business, and take it to the next stage. So that was really exciting, and that's how Amazon Web Services was born. We're really excited to have our first guest. His name is Denning Tan. He's a startup lead for Asean and AWS at AWS. I hear he's got a background in law from the University of London, so it's very interesting how this guy who studied law ended up in the startup space. But you've also had founder experience, Denning. You were a CEO of Imaginator and Pivot Team at one point as a co-founder, but you've been with AWS since 2018. Maybe before we start, you maybe can introduce yourself and how you kind of got to AWS.
Hi, Aaron. Good to have everyone here. Thank you, Scale Up. Thank you, Magic, for making this session happen. That was a very generous introduction. Not well. Aside from friends, most people don't know that I was a lawyer before for a large part of my life. I kind of stumbled into the startup space while I was practicing law. So I made a bold decision very early in my career to move to China, actually, to Beijing. There I joined a law firm, and that was kind of at a time when China was, really booming. Everyone was coming in, a lot of foreign companies, and a lot of new investments into startups. So I kind of landed plumbed in a firm and in a role that allowed me to interface and represent a lot of startup customers. And that was my first taste, and a lot of these startup customers went on to IPO, some of them on NASDAQ. Incidentally, the firm also handled a deal that Amazon was in. They acquired this company called Joyo then in China. So I was at the back end of that. So that kind of gave me an inkling to, hey, this startup space, this startup world. And I started to interact a lot more with founders and startups. And so I realized I resonated very strongly with that. The whole innovation. It was really younger days for me. And as I moved on, I became a VC and PE lawyer. Very much either representing startups or funds. And how I landed in AWS, it wasn't a direct route for sure. So when I came back from overseas, I went to a few places. I came back from overseas. I bumped into a friend, right? So some of you might know him. His name is Andy Sid of 123RF Imagine Group. And we were, as usual, we were just talking about things that were nothing to do with our work and business. But somehow that conversation, very quickly pivoted into, something that we could do together. And the rest is history, as they say. And I landed up in AWS in 123RF for a number of years. At 123RF, I had a lot of opportunity to explore the startup space, to start a lot of new things. Imaginator came up from that as well. We took a role in investing into startups, incubating startups. I did a lot of pitching as well for myself and for 123RF. So it just took me another route. And then, I came out on my own for a bit. And the AWS opportunity just came in, kind of at I won't say a right time. It just came, and I realized that I want to give this a go. The culture, which is what we're going to be talking about, really resonated with me. I have a little story that I'll share later on. But and so today my role is really about helping startups succeed. Right. So primarily to succeed, with AWS as a technology of choice, but really my passion is to help startups succeed regardless. So across ASEAN, I also take care of Pakistan. And looking forward to speaking to anyone.
Well, that's awesome. In fact, as you're saying, you also work with Pakistan. Somebody mentioned on YouTube that they're from Pakistan and say hello to you. So I guess you have fans all over the region. So I guess you work with companies from not just Malaysia, but Singapore, Indonesia as well. I guess, what is your general sense of the startup ecosystem in ASEAN as a region? And then specifically, how do you think of Malaysia as a market?
So the startup ecosystem in ASEAN is definitely booming, right? But because we have so many countries, they are rising at a different rate. But because of the way that cloud and technology has accelerated, even countries which have kind of like taken off at a later stage are catching up really fast. So case in point is Pakistan. Pakistan is not ASEAN, but they kind of took off, like a lot later, right? So I think technology is a great equalizer in today's scenario. Cloud has definitely allowed companies to innovate a lot less expensively, a lot quicker, a lot more agile. The programs that AWS has, for example, they activate credits, help a lot of startups to experiment, to get on board, and to do that very quickly. So I think the world has changed a lot. In the last 2 years, of course, the pandemic has changed it even more. Remote working, remote learning, cloud, everything remote and autonomous is all geared towards innovation and being able to build anything from wherever you are.
Awesome.
Yeah, and sorry, and the question on Malaysia. So Malaysia has been at the forefront of this space from very early on, right? I think this year we have some really exciting news that have come through. A lot of very interesting investments. We run a lot of events, so we see a lot of things behind the scenes, and there's a lot of activity with early stage startups that are really building just from their homes right today, literally. So we're very excited about the continued growth for Malaysia, and with a few champions that are going to be hopefully coming up from this scene.
Awesome. That's a great segue. I think you're right. Like Malaysia has, in the recent weeks, seen some really, really positive news from the overall ecosystem. We had Fave being acquired by Pine Labs about a month or so ago. And then we now hear stories of companies like Qasem and Aerodyne achieving the U word, right? That unicorn status that we, cross fingers, right? And we're all really excited about that. And I guess it's a really exciting time to be a founder in Malaysia, and I guess to be working in the tech ecosystem in Malaysia. And one of those companies, as we say goodbye to Denning for a second, and we'll catch you back in a second, Denning, is Jirnexu, right? Jirnexu kind of has really made waves over the last couple of years. They've been around for some time, actually. But in 2012, the banking ecosystem was nowhere near where it was today, or nowhere near as digital as it was today. And so Yuen Tuck and James Barnes sat together looking at how they could kind of look at the financial services industry with a real focus on how to get comparisons for credit cards and loans and how to help the customer, right? And so they've grown the business. They have Ringgit Plus in Malaysia, Credit Gogo in Indonesia, and they've really established themselves as a B to B to C player. And in 2016, they also launched Express Apply, a platform for financial institutions they can use to connect their last digital leg to online consumers, and then with a focus on B2B as well. It's really exciting to see Jirnexu grow over the years, and I'm really excited to have Yuen Tuck, or YT as we'll call him for the rest of the session, join us today. YT, you've got a really interesting background. Like Denning, I kind of snooped you on LinkedIn as well to get information about your background, and I discovered some interesting stuff. I understand you two went to Beijing, spent a year there learning Mandarin. And of all things, I was really surprised that you graduated from Oxford University, and you studied modern history. So I think that's really interesting that you did it. But you've been in banking and finance for many years, and Jirnexu is one of those startups that's been around for some time. So it's a real interesting story of building a sustainable business over time. I guess welcome, YT, to the session. Maybe you can introduce yourself to all those who are listening to us.
Cool. Aaron, thank you. First, thank you for having me. Denning, thanks for inviting me, and thanks for the introduction and for digging around in my past. So yes, I did study history. So at the time, people, I remember now, actually, people would always ask, it's like, are you going to be a teacher? What are you going to do with that degree? But as you pointed out, I went from a history undergrad into finance. I started in banking, spent a couple of years in banking, then moved on, spent a couple of years in a hedge fund in the UK. Came back to Malaysia in 2010. Didn't want to start a business straight away. I'd been away from Malaysia. At that point, I'd been away for 15 years. So I just wanted to settle in a bit. But fast forward to 2012. For those of you who were here at the time, and not just in Malaysia, I think it was across the whole region, that's when the current kind of startup boom kicked off. It was from what I could see at the time, it was really driven by, I think it was Rocket Internet started pumping a lot of money into the region. I started with group buying, e-commerce, and then everything. So the world really started to change, and you could really see it in 2012. So that's when I decided to come out and start. The first business was Ringgit Plus, right? And that's still the core of what we do. And as you pointed out, I suppose one of the key drivers of why did I start it, why did we start it as a bunch of founders, was that we just really wanted the service, right? It's very hard. Back then it was very hard to find the right financial product to suit your needs. So that's really been the kind of core problem we've been trying to solve for consumers over the last, it's been 9 years now. So it's been a long time. So yeah, there's a lot of stories which I look forward to sharing as the questions come in. But a lot has changed, right? I mean, back in 2012, there really was not much of a startup scene around. And now it's, as Danny pointed out, well, the different parts of ASEAN are at different stages. It's really booming across the region.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. I mean, 2012 was when I also first got involved in the scene. I was working for a company, which was a startup out of Singapore, and was kind of getting involved in the ecosystem and learning how tech companies work. I mean, you guys were fintech before fintech was cool, right? Like now, like everybody and their uncle wants to build a fintech, but you guys really were like the pioneers in the country. I guess, I mean, it's quite clear that you saw an opportunity, but what kind of drove you guys to come together and kind of create Ringgit Plus, which eventually became, which is now Jirnexu, yeah?
Yeah, we were kind of unusual. I'm one of 6 co-founders.
6?
So there are 6 of us. We actually started it as 2 separate companies. We merged pretty early on. Well, why did we do that? I mean, we actually, before we merged, we started working as partners, and we just found that we worked very well together, right? So when we went to clients, whether it was banks or insurance companies, we found that our value proposition was a lot stronger when it was put together. And similarly for consumers, one of the businesses was very content driven, the other one was comparison and kind of acquisition driven. So that's what brought us together, as a set of 2 separate founders. Some of the founders kind of joined us very early on. I suppose what did we have in common? We all saw the same opportunity. I guess on the one hand, selfishly we wanted the service. On the other hand, a lot of us had used a similar service in other markets, so we believed there was an opportunity to replicate that. But we learned the hard way that just copying and pasting business models was not always that easy.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, and I guess one last question before we bring Danny back and go to the rest of the Q&A. I guess what do you think was the secret to keeping you guys around for so long? 9 years is a long time in startup years. Most startups don't last a year, and even those who are successful, take a while. Yeah. So what do you think the secret behind? And with 6 co-founders, that's also no joke as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's going to be that's something I'll probably cover quite a bit as we talk about culture. But in terms of the business, some of it's luck, right? Like I think if we started the business much earlier, we wouldn't have seen that kind of early success, right? Because again, if we started in like 2008 or 2010, we wouldn't have seen that kind of growth in adoption of internet services. So there's definitely some luck in there. Another thing is just don't give up, right? Like, there have been constant challenges along the way. Many near-death experiences, right? Like whenever you get a bunch of founders together, you share stories. It's pretty normal. And yeah, I suppose just never give up. Whenever you hear, I always love listening to like Patrick Grove, one of the original and most successful startup founders to come out of Malaysia. When he talks about fundraising, he's like, hey, he needs to knock on 100 doors, right, to get a yes.
Yeah.
And that's part of it. Most people will say no across every single part of the business, right? Whether it's consumers don't want to try a product in the early days, clients don't want to sign you up, investors don't want to fund you, and that's pretty normal. And it doesn't change, right? Like you continue to have these kind of challenges and problems. They just get bigger and bigger. So I think a key part of it is just refusing to give up and just being very stubborn.
Excellent. Yeah, I guess on that note, we'll bring Denim back up. I think it's really interesting how YT, you mentioned the ability to be resilient, which I think has come out a couple of times in these sessions we've done. But I think that we keep coming back to is the idea of culture and team and building organizations. When we first put these 3 sessions together that we're going to do, we did our first one with Stripe, and then last week was with General Assembly. We kind of knew the General Assembly session would be kind of around culture and organization, but somehow everybody has gravitated to this idea of building a team, growing your organization, being able to kind of scale not through code, but through culture, which I think is really, really interesting. And really, really interesting to hear even this coming out from YT, your story as well. I guess let's go and ask the most simple question, right? Like, from your standpoint, what is this thing, culture? And what's your view on this? Like, how do you see culture in your organization? I guess, YT, you can share in a bit about Jirnexu's journey, but from Danny, let's start with you first. Like, I guess coming from the law profession, then incubating companies, and then now in AWS, how has culture first influenced your journey, and how does it apply in AWS?
So you can write it or say it anyway, but essentially for me, culture these are just shared values and principles, right? In an organization, and how we express them, how we bring them to life, how it evolves. And I think in my case, not just because I'm at AWS, I've seen so many different cultures in different countries, in different settings, but the aspect of culture and living, breathing, practicing those cultures have never come across more strongly than at AWS, at Amazon. I never knew it could be like that. Sure, I've been in the startup space. I've tried to build my own culture, but to see it play out at Amazon, the way that it plays out in a company with 1 million employees is really amazing. So many lessons to learn. I mean, if there was just one reason, I think, for anyone to want to join an organization like Amazon, that would be it, to experience this culture and how it really creates amazing things. Yeah.
Wow.
So,
Yeah, YT and I made a face around the same time when you said 1 million employees, because I think I didn't realize there was 1 million employees. That's a lot of people.
Yeah. So I mean, those numbers are plus minus, but I didn't think that I could experience
plus a couple of thousand here, a couple of thousand there. Yeah.
I didn't think that I could truly experience the startup, startup culture in such a large organization until I joined Amazon. I didn't know what to expect. So it's been really refreshing. It continues to change. I think in this remote work setting, it has proven how resilient it is. So a lot to talk about.
Oh, very interesting. Maybe YT, you can share a little bit about Jirnexu. What is culture from your standpoint? And I guess you've built it from the start with probably the 6 of the founders, and then eventually now you've grown the team. Obviously, it's evolved over the last 9 years. What's culture to you?
That's a good question. I guess the easiest way to think about it is it's the way we work together, right? And what's important, and what are the kind of important character traits we look at in terms of people we want to work with and the way we interact. All businesses have ultimately have very similar objectives, right? Businesses want to grow, they want to be profitable. So most businesses are very kind of numbers and P&L driven. So it's really, to me, it's about what's the most important thing in terms of how people work together, right? As Denning, I love how Denning put it, right? It's like core values essentially.
And have those core values evolved over time, or are they kind of you set in stone like Moses from the hill, and then it's been that way since?
Have they evolved over time? I don't think so. And part of this is because there's still so many of us around from the early days, right? And we're still there. So in terms of, when I think about, when I was forced to start thinking more about culture and core values in the business, I used to think about, what makes the best teams work together, right? I used to look at, what are the interactions that work really well? Why do these interactions between people work so well? And that's how we created the core values. So in a way, when you say does it change, did it change over time? I don't think so, because
Okay.
I would always think back to the early days of what made us such a good team, right? And how do we keep those how do we keep that alive as the organization and people evolve?
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. I guess it puts in the value of like really thinking through what's important to you when you start a company, and then just reinforcing that over time. Which goes to, I guess, the next question, right? Like, if I were a new person to join either AWS or Jirnexu, would I feel the culture? One of the things I used to like to do before this pandemic, right, was go to people's offices and just and I like to hear the buzz in the room. Like it's just the sales guys yapping on the phone or people walking around the corridors. I love the energy of an office. But I guess if I walk in, I guess now you can't walk into an office. But I guess right now, how would I understand the AWS culture if I were to join today, Danny?
So if you were to just check out online, you'll see that Amazon has these 14 leadership principles. These principles, they started from just 6 originally, and then they moved on to 10, and now it's 14. One of them is called hire and develop the best. So that doesn't mean that the people that they hire are indeed the best. It's just a mindset, a principle that they try to adhere to. But I would say that the culture is so intentional that in the hiring process, they have a very unique hiring process that until you experience it, you wouldn't expect it to be like that unless somebody told you, right? So it's a big tech company. You think that when you go in, they're going to be asking you all kinds of tech questions or tech related questions. But it's not the case. The questions are very much behavioral, right? And and a lot of it is based on trying to see whether you have already demonstrated or exemplified some of these 14 leadership principles, right? So when you do get hired and you join, and you see that from day one, the practice of these principles are so embedded, people really live and breathe it. I've said this many times. And because you were hired and you had these principles in you that you didn't realize, you didn't articulate it that way, it makes sense to you, it resonates with you, so you understand it. But even until today, when I look back at the principles, it's like a guiding pillar. It continues to not just evolve, but my interpretation of it continues to change as I interact with customers, I interact with my peers. It takes on more and more meaning. So I would say, yes, you would understand it from the start, but you would continue to appreciate it throughout your time there, right? I'll share one story of my first engagement with, and the principles are not, the be all and all of the culture. They have, many other very interesting snippets like, day one mindset or the working backwards process, right? Some years before I joined AWS, I was pitching to an investor, a really high profile investor, and I was sharing with him, some of the new products that we've launched, what they do, how amazing it is, asking for money, right? And instead of getting the feedback that, asking me so what's the traction for this, how are you doing on this, what kind of money you need, he didn't ask me any of that. He started asking me questions like, how well do you truly know your customer? How deeply do you understand the problem and opportunity that you're trying to solve? What key benefit? So all these questions were very much borrowed from the concept of working backwards, which is working backwards from the customer to and to really understand what what you're trying to build and putting it in something like a press release, they call it, before you actually build it. So he wanted to understand the process that we went through in building it, and whether I have really thought it through before I launched it. And that really provoked my thoughts. I struggled to answer. And he went on to explain that, that this is a working backwards process that came out from Amazon, where he was previously from AWS as well, right, incidentally. And it was so really refreshing to me that former employees of the company, take these learnings away with them, and it continues to shape them in wherever they go, right, in their context, in their setting. Really powerful, and that I think it struck a chord with me, that how powerful the culture of Amazon is. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Like, how somebody's experience working in AWS influenced them so much so in their next career that it influenced you, so that that impression is made until today, which is really kind of stunning, actually, to see the impact of the organization, actually. Really interesting story, Denning. YT, so you're the founder of the company, right? What happens to somebody who joins Jirnexu on day one? Can they feel the culture? Is there a ragging process or an induction process that happens? How does this work?
Yeah, so how about I just start with a story? I also love to, or used to love doing what you mentioned, right, which is to go into a startup's office, just because it's usually they're some of the coolest offices around. So you mentioned Fave. I think everyone's familiar with Fave and Joel, right? He's one of the most successful founders that's come out of Malaysia. So Fave's office is upstairs to ours, and we also share a board member. So one day this board member, I think he had a board meeting at Fave, and he decided to come down and say hi and walk around. And we just moved in, so he wanted to come see our office. And he didn't say this to me. He said to someone else in the group. He said afterwards, like, it's really funny how the offices reflect the characters of the founders. And now if you, and that's not necessarily a compliment. I didn't take a huge offense. I thought it was hilarious, because if you go to Fave's office, right, and if you know Joel, you can expect, you would know what to expect. I mean, it's the only office I've seen in Malaysia where they built their own speakeasy, right? So they literally carved out part of the office with a secret door and a bar. They have games areas and everything. Whereas for our office is literally is the opposite, right? It was just 100% functional. I think eventually there was a tennis table, but no games, very functional, very plain. So to your point about would you feel the culture from day one? I don't think you notice it straight away from joining, but to Denning's point about the hiring process, I think you would feel it and sense it in the hiring process, right? You should start to see the commonalities in the way we communicate, right? The sort of questions we ask, what we think is important. That should come through in the hiring process. But do we do something special on first day or first weeks? Not really. But my sense is that any potential candidate would pick it up through the recruiting process.
Right. So I think it's really interesting that both of you seem to have gone to this idea of kind of filtering through the hiring process to kind of help them understand the culture. I think a lot of founders out there kind of always ask us, like, I got this hire, how do I get them to kind of adopt our culture? But what I'm hearing is that getting this out of the way early on, even before they join the company, is extremely valuable as well to the team, to the company, as well as the employees. So would you actually tell founders who are listening in, like, hey, you know what, have a really good hiring process that helps their people come and learn about your company even while they're getting hired, right? It's a way for you to kind of share the culture. Would you guys advocate that? Anyone want to take that?
I mean, on our side, we just wouldn't hire, right? If we didn't believe that the candidate lived and breathed our core values, we just wouldn't hire them.
That's really interesting.
I think at AWS is very similar. So the hiring process is not done by just one person. There's 4 or 5 of us who we have to agree, right, that this person exhibits this, exhibits that, very serious about it. We take it very seriously. Of course, I think perhaps not in the case of Amazon, but in the case of startups at an early stage, sometimes you need to hire a certain person, certain skill sets that might not have, all that culture points locked down, and you might take that, that chance, to hire the person anyway, right? I think most startups have done that. There's been good stories and less good stories, but yeah. So I would say that it's not a hard and fast rule, because sometimes the needs for that particular role does is important as well. So yeah, I mean, if I were a founder, I would definitely consider those skill sets as important as well. But the culture parts, yeah, you just cannot underrate it, because if you hire wrong, down the road, it's really so much more painful, so much more difficult to undo whatever damage, if there was damage, than if you didn't hire the person at all. So it's very, very important. I guess it's even more important for early stage startups. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword, I would say.
Yeah, very interesting. What do you think about the founder and how the founder influences the culture? Maybe we'll start with YT in this one, right? Like in your case, you got 6 founders, right? How important, how influential is the founder in decisions of culture, and how you kind of share that with the organization?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I mean, not just looking at ourselves, but also looking at other startups which we know well, other founders I know well. I mean, they create the core values will typically come out of the founders, right? They're the first ones on the ground. As long as they're still there, they're typically making the most senior hires, right? And then they will be setting the benchmarks in terms of who you should hire, who you shouldn't. So they absolutely set the culture. I think it's very hard to get away from that, until the business is no longer founder run, right? Like once the business is entirely professionalized, then yeah, things can definitely change. But from what I've seen, startups which have been around 5, 10, 15 years, if the founder is still there, they are still the ones who drive and own the culture.
Yeah, and you've always heard the stories of how when the founder leaves the company, right? Things change, and sometimes it's for the better, because obviously maybe professional executives bring in new culture, new ideas. What's your view on this? Do you think like founders should stay with the company as long as they can, or is it sometimes better just to kind of bring in experts as soon as the business gets big enough?
I think it depends on a lot of things, right? Like it depends on what the founder wants to do. It depends on what stage the business is at. It depends on that's a really tough one, right? Because there's so many examples of there's so many successful case studies of both extremes, right? And actually, I remember now talking to he's a leadership coach, executive coach based in Singapore, who's been a CEO for most of his life, and he says generally the research shows that companies are more successful when they professionalize, right? And the founders hand over. So that's what the research shows. But then again, you've got companies like Facebook, Amazon, where the founder drove them to be some of the most successful technology companies in the world. So there's, I mean, and in our experience, we've had great success bringing on board senior leadership, right, and having founders hand over leadership roles to professionals. So it's, I've seen a bit of both. It's really hard. I don't think there's a hard and fast rule around this.
Interesting. I think that, thinking about how founders leave and eventually let their baby go. Jeff Bezos was recently in the news announcing that he's going to leave his position at Amazon. I guess, Danny, how is Jeff Bezos kind of in the culture he set early on? Earlier we were talking about his annual letters that he sends out every year that all of us startup founders would read and like dissect, just to see if there's nuggets of wisdom in there. I mean, this is stuff that Jeff Bezos has been famous for doing. So first question, I guess, before I tell you what the next question is, how do you think like this larger than life character in Jeff Bezos has kind of influenced the culture of Amazon and I guess even into AWS?
Yeah, tough question. I mean, so I think you struck the nail on his head in saying that larger than life. Naturally, there are several founders. No, I wouldn't say many, but several founders who just have is such a strong persona, so Jeff is definitely one of them. Steve Jobs, of course, like Elon Musk and so on. And these founders would, a lot of people, associate the company, with them. That's so strong is that influence, right? And for all founders, I think going to YT's point, especially if, with the core team, they essentially were the culture, to start off with. It could have just been one founder, which was how Jeff started. It was just him, so the culture was him, and then others came, and because culture is shared, it started to change, and so that culture it takes shape, it takes life from its early originators. But it continues to, in my case, I believe that it continues to evolve. It might not get articulated in the early days into like the 14 leadership principles. So that wasn't written for a long time, right? It was only written like not too long ago. But the culture is definitely there, right? It's living, breathing. It happens from all the time, and you can feel it, you can see it in things that are done, the way that they work together. So I think founders definitely play a very big role, and as they take a kind of like a stock check over years, and think about what do they want to be, where do they want to be, what would success look like, what do they want to aim for, then they might come up with some important new values or principles that they want to aim towards, then the culture might change if they take it seriously enough.
So I guess the obvious question to go to next is, now that Jeff is leaving the executive role that he had and has held for like 21 years now, how's the company adapting? I'm sure there's preparations in place. I'm sure, or is it never spoken because it's gonna continue forever? How is Amazon as an organization kind of preparing for the departure of the founder, at least in an executive role?
So I kind of have to talk about this in code language almost,
sure.
But so I think what Amazon has done well is they have thought through this leadership succession very well, and very early on, right? So the announcement, as you've seen, was made very early on. Jeff is still there as CEO founder. He leaves soon. Andy Jassy, who is CEO of AWS, takes over on July 1st, right? And so this was thought through very, very early on. Andy Jassy was with Jeff from early days, and from the very start of AWS itself. So I think that the culture was also partly shaped by Andy. You can kind of say it that way. And the beauty about a well thought out and well implemented culture is that it outlives the people who created them, right? So I think in this case, the culture has been so strong and so clear, so distinct, that it will outlive myself and everyone who is there right now. So that that includes Jeff, right? So in many ways, even if Jeff is not there on a daily basis, I would say that the culture will stay in many forms, principally the same, but evolve just like everything else. Yeah, but that whole so at the heart of it, customer obsession, innovation, trust, these core principles, I think, will never change.
Yeah, and it's really exciting to see that Jeff has made a bit of an announcement that he's going to go to space in the first manned flight. I'm sure all of you guys are kind of nervous. We're joking about it before we go on air, but it's going to be very exciting to see him literally go to new frontiers where no man has gone before. Really exciting to see literally doing that. I guess the next question is how important do you see that decisions on culture, like transparency, ethics, that you made in the early days, YT, have kind of made the company what it is today? Is there a story you can tell, like a key moment that has influenced things that have happened till today?
Yeah, it's and the funny thing is, right? Actually, in our early days, I gave zero thought to culture or values. I guess part of this was because I came out of an industry which, and without wanting to throw shade on an entire industry, in finance, culture and core values they don't really feature, right? Especially in banking. In banking, it was very simple, right? They pay you, and you do anything they ask at any day, time. You just do what's required, and you do that because they pay you, right? I think that was the kind of the simple, that was the kind of the substitute for core values in finance. I don't think that's changed much. And again, it's very results driven, right? It's you hit your KPIs, you don't. If you can't do the job, you're out. And that's that's what that's very much how the business was run in the first couple of years. We got stuff done, right? We executed, we grew, but it got to a point where I think nobody enjoyed working there anymore, right? Like you could see no one was really happy. It just wasn't fun. People didn't enjoy working together anymore. And that's when we kind of had to take a step back and say, hey, right, like what's changed? Yes, we got to execute. Yes, you got to hit the numbers. You got to grow. But why is this just not a place people want to be anymore? And we went through it probably took us around 2 years to it was literally like a 180, right? Of saying, look, there's no culture, it doesn't matter, to saying, okay, look, this is the top priority. We need to distill what matters to us. We need to make it a priority. And that's that process took about 2 years. And I think we've covered a lot of the kind of the key points of how that happens, right? So it has to be part of the hiring process. For us, it's part of the evaluation process. But the funny thing is that there was no thought or effort put into core values. It was almost the opposite in our early days.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of almost like it organically came into place, right? Based on the experiences.
Forced to. Not organically.
I mean, the environment forced it together, like almost coagulated the values because situations kind of got you there.
Yeah.
Yeah. How much do you think innovation and like running a startup is about top-down leadership versus bottom-up? We've seen like examples of great products that were kind of bottom-up projects. Like Gmail is a famous example, right? It was a little team working on it, and that was like a bottom-up approach. But then there are thousands of stories of great products that are literally top-down. But what's your sense on this? Like, obviously, the founder plays a role early on, but as the company grows, do you feel the need to kind of allow more bottom-up innovation?
I'm not sure if it's about allowing it. It's, for us, it was more. It tends to be end user driven, right? End user, in our case, the end user could be the consumer, it could be a client, like a bank or insurance company. So I don't can't really think of examples of like innovation or problem solving being top down driven, right? It really has to be driven out of the end user, right? And what they need, what's their problem, what are their pain points, what are the restrictions around those pain points, and how do you go about solving those?
Cool. Denning, what from your standpoint, what do you feel about this? Like, do you feel like the bottom-up approach actually could help organizations, or top-down always works? And I guess being a million strong, I'm sure there's lots of examples of bottom-up ideas as well that's kind of gone up through the ranks.
So innovation is at the heart of Amazon, right? The day one mindset, for example, is about innovation, scrappiness. It's as though you step into a founder role from day one. Like if you're starting your company from day one, how excited you are. That mindset is so strong. At Amazon, you have one. I keep coming back to the principles, but one of the principles is invent and simplify, right? And in that, I think what that principle says, or rather exemplifies essentially, is that everyone is expected to innovate in whatever role that you are. You don't have to be a tech guy to innovate. You can be a business guy and innovate the way that you do things, the way that you go to market, the way that you sell, the way that you programs that you run. You are expected to innovate. what carries the most weight at Amazon is, we always hear this term inside Amazon, BAU, which is business as usual, and most people don't really want to hear about business as usual. We always talk about non-BAU, non-business as usual, and that's because everyone is expected to do things which are non-business as usual, hence innovation, and in many cases also in like invention, right? So things like Alexa, Kindle, these came out through the working backwards process, and innovation is encouraged at all levels, whether you just join day one or whether you are very long tenured, one of these senior leaders. There's no excuse for not innovating. So that's a core, right, at the company. But having said that, what works best also depends on the stage that you're at, and working with with different customers. You will know that for companies that have existed for a long time, your conglomerates, your very big companies, enterprises, they have a lot of legacy, like technology, legacy processes, a lot of technical debt, many things that difficult to change because it's been so entrenched, right? And from our experience, I'm talking from a non-startup perspective, but in our experience, to bring about change, be it innovation or otherwise, in those kinds of settings, the top-down approach is absolutely essential. So that political will to bring about change can almost only be done top-down in these large organizations. If you don't have the political will from above, if you are a guy, like a developer or something, you build something and you're trying to push it through the product, through the different verticals internally, often it falls on deaf ears, in my experience. So it's not that it's impossible, but it's just a lot more efficient, and if the top guys have buy-in into the change that you're trying to bring. So even moving on to cloud, for enterprises, it has to come from top down because it brings about so much change and innovation. It's the transformation is not just tech, it's people, it's the way that we do things. That needs to come top down in those cases.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay, we're gonna move after this into questions from the audience who's asked some questions, and we'll go into that. I've enjoyed the discussion so far, and we're kind of serious talking about business. So I thought I'd ask you one last question before we go to the questions from the audience. So, what do your teams do for fun? And I always believe, like, the old adage, like, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, right? And I guess the same is true with startups, right? If it's only about work, sometimes it just creates a very tense environment. Some companies go for drinks. Some companies do outings together, go for dinners or something like that. In my previous startup, we used to do like monthly team activities, and there's even a picture somewhere on the internet of me doing aerial yoga. It's a true picture, you can find it somewhere. But I guess for you guys, like, what's the most fun you've had with the team, and what do you guys do? What does the team do for fun? And I guess what's the most fun you've had with the team? We'll start with you, IT. Like, I guess with Jirnexu, 9 years worth of work and also probably fun as well.
Oof, it's changed, right? Anything from like very simple stuff, so at our monthly town halls when we used to actually be able to do them, like it's just very simple and not particularly expensive to just provide like food and drink, right? Once a month in the office, nothing fancy, just to give people a chance to unwind. Drinks is definitely a big part of it. Kind of that, yeah, I think that's always been a big part of it. Partly founders, partly the people we bring on board. The most fun has always been the retreats when we get a chance. We don't get to do it every year. I think we do it every couple of years, right? Like taking the key people away for at least a day, one night, sometimes two, spending more time together. That's always been, those have probably been the most fun times we've had, right, outside of work. And in terms of other stuff, it has changed over time depending on who's in the company, right? Like sometimes you get people come in, they say, hey, can I do a sports club? That kind of changes.
There's always one guy who like advertised for badminton night, right? There's always one guy will come and start that.
Futsal.
Futsal, yeah. Denning, how does it work for you guys?
I think
do activities together,
yeah, I mean, we try to do a lot, and obviously the COVID has changed a lot of the way that we do things. Engagement is something that you have to really work hard at. It's not easy. I think we're all still learning, especially when you have big teams. But probably the most fun that we normally have for our team is when we meet somewhere else, like in a non-common country, for example. It could be a retreat or it could be an event. Our roles require us to travel quite a bit, and we often bump into each other, like fellow Amazonians in some other country. But when we all huddle up together in a common place, it's just hanging out together as one team, because we're all remote, and then we come together. Yeah, we just basically we go to the arcade, we play
nice.
games, we go for drinks. In Las Vegas, what happens there, it stays there, right? Things like that. So we had a lot of fun when we travel, and we have our group events. But I think in a pandemic setting, it's become a lot more difficult. So we try to do things like drinks always come into, we have this cocktail sessions where we learn how to do cocktails, for example.
Cool.
There are some prizes, and then we try to create an O2O kind of environment whereby, for example, everyone who participates, they get sent something. The Malaysian team is really good at doing that. For example, they do it regularly. There's also gaming sessions that we have. So we try to get creative, but I would say it's difficult. It's hard. I mean, in a home setting where, especially guys with families, it's difficult. Even when you involve the families, it's challenging. It's just we're still learning how to do the best with it. I think I'll let you in on a small secret. So YT mentioned Joel, right? So and Joel exited recently from Faith. So I did have a conversation with him, about having a weekly or bi-weekly tennis kind of a session for founders, where we just have in the mornings anyone can join, and then after that we will go off and have a brunch or something, and just talk about startups and problems that you have. But in the morning we're just playing for fun, right? And we'll just have some coaching, some playing, some games. So something that is regular. I think we're trying to implement that. So but we're still learning, and hopefully we come out of the lockdown soon, and we can do some of these fun things in a safe way.
Cool. Yeah. So if you inviting people to tennis, you can say in the link. I'm sure 100 startup founders will join you and Joel for tennis. Something I picked up. So do people who work at Amazon really call themselves Amazonians?
They do and they don't. So if you're in Amazon, we kind of don't refer to ourselves, hey, as an Amazonian. No, you don't. You kind of don't say that.
You don't do like the Wonder Woman thing. Amazonians, no war cry or anything.
No. Well, as far as I know, we don't. We do, refer to it once in a while in passing. Yeah, but no, it's there's no hang-ups in that.
Yeah.
I think one other thing that's really amazed me about being an Amazon is it's really flat. For such a large organization, it's really flat. I'm probably not allowed to say this, but really next to no politics in my view. For such a large organization, very flat. And because the culture is so pervasive, I'll give you an example. So day 3 or 4 of me joining Amazon, I joined, and then I flew up to Singapore, and then I flew up to Seattle. Just so happened because they had something on, and I joined a town hall. And in the town hall there were many people who had just joined in 1 or 2 days, just like me, and it was really eye-opening and refreshing to see that folks who had just joined a day or two, could come basically to the mic and pose really, really tough, super tough, challenging questions to the top leaders of the organization. And the top leaders would take it very, very seriously, in a very respectful way, and follow up very, respectfully, follow up on those questions, follow up with the actions, give updates, so much pain and care that went into responding and being earnest and sincere about it. It's wow, it's like, you almost don't see this happening, especially in an Asian context. But that anyone can just step up to the plate and be free to say without recrimination, is it's really amazing for me to see. So
Wow.
so I think that tells you how strong that culture is, and the kind of culture that we have.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, guys. This is a really fun session. We're gonna go to I think there's one question from the floor that I want to ask. The second one, I think I'll answer it just before we go off. We're already at the hour mark, so I don't want to take too much of everybody's time, and we can wrap this up real quick. Gerard Pillai asks a question, right? So he starts off by saying, startup seems to be a buzzword, especially during the current pandemic. Many accelerators, incubators are popping up and trying to attract the next, I guess he means unicorn, as we mentioned earlier. The first question is, how can the ecosystem in Malaysia differentiate itself so that it can leverage on some of the unique strengths to help propel startups? And he adds on to be more sustainable is how he adds it. Yeah. So I guess, I don't know, which one of you guys want to take this? How can we differentiate ourselves, and how can we propel ourselves to kind of be more sustainable?
I can go first. This is a very loaded question.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So thanks, Gerard, for the question. I would say in Malaysia's context, so when you look at the macro factors, Malaysia 30 million, not big, not small, right? You have Indonesia, of course, such a large country. Vietnam, even Thailand is pretty large. Myanmar, aside from what they are going through now, pretty large country as well. Malaysia, not big, not small, right? So what do you kind of do, with it? And to be honest, personally, not just because I'm Malaysian, but I really respect Malaysian founders. I think Malaysians are such a creative lot, and there are so many things going for them, right? But in the startup space, if you're thinking about it big and you're thinking about it long term, and you have to, especially in the startup space, we're talking about scale, about delivery. You have to think about your ability to scale at least regionally, because our market is not large enough, right? And I think there are various problems that startup founders are solving in Malaysia that can go regional and be localized regionally. We're seeing some champions doing that now. Jirnexu is one of them. The likes of Qasem, the likes of Aerodyne, right, as you mentioned, quite a few of them. And these are the ones that have a regional reach and penetration that are going to be able to attract the right kind of investment money and help, right? And like on the AWS side, we try to do that. We try to help these startups to achieve that through many ways. We have a lot of go-to-market strategies and programs that we help startups with, because we realize that this scale, this issue of scale for Malaysian startups is very real. You can show success initially in the local context, but eventually you'll need to succeed at least regionally or globally, right, in order to make a mark in the longer term. At least that's what I think. So I think but in terms of how to differentiate itself, I think we are different from our own Malaysian culture. We build and see things very differently, and trust in yourself. My fellow Malaysians, trust in yourself. You really are amazing. like and you come up with really ridiculously creative stuff. You just have to believe in yourself a bit more, right? Yeah, and think bigger.
I think that's a really interesting point, right? Like, we see a lot of great Malaysian founders come to us at Scale Up Malaysia, and we look at a lot of pictures and look at a lot of businesses, and we find one of the major issues is that a lot of Malaysian founders don't think big enough. And really, I guess you're saying this as well, Denning, that they can really go bigger if they thought regional really quickly, growing the business into more than just the Malaysian market, because it's a large enough market, but not maybe large enough to build a large, exciting business. Which is, I think, why like Jirnexu is, you've gone to Indonesia as well, seeing the opportunity to build regionally as well. What do you think? How do you think Malaysian startups can differentiate themselves, and how do you think they can build large businesses?
Yeah, what can I add on to what Danny has said? I think a couple of things, perhaps. One thing that's Malaysia's very good for. It's not good for building scale, right? There's almost, we can't pretend we're the biggest market in the region, right? But it's very good for building profitability and good unit economics. So a lot of startups actually have very successful Malaysian operations from a P&L perspective. They may not have the most traffic, right? They may not have the most users, but very often they've got very good P&Ls, right? So if you look at like the early days, Internet 1.0 success stories, for example, property listings, right? Malaysia was always one of the best markets for the property listings businesses. So I think that helps if you can use it as a base. But to Denning's point, yeah, you can't avoid the need to except for maybe a couple industries, right? Almost anything you do, you have to look to scale outside if you want to, if you want to get to that kind of $1 billion mark or beyond. Malaysia, but Malaysia as a market is a very good place to do business, right? Like if you've try starting businesses as a foreigner across the region, and Malaysia is one of the most open, right? It's fairly easy. Rule of law is good. Talent is not as bad as people make it out to be. Transport links are good. So it's a good place to work. It's a good place to start a business. And one last thing, which regional investors shared, one thing they like about Malaysian founders is that they tend to be balanced, or they have a mixed experience across like a developed market and an emerging market, right? If you start in like a Vietnam or Indonesia or Philippines, they're very emerging, right? Huge opportunities, but very emerging. If you're in Singapore, it's very developed, right? And in Malaysia, you get a taste of both. So you do see businesses in Malaysia. Because businesses in Malaysia grow up in that environment, there's opportunities to expand into both developed and developing economies, right? So that's definitely another advantage.
Okay, excellent. I guess on that note, we'll end today's session, and thank you guys for both your views. Like you guys, we've got a lot of faith in Malaysia. I guess you can tell by the name of our accelerator being Scale Up Malaysia. We believe in Malaysian founders and Malaysian entrepreneurs and the ability to grow successful companies. And we hope that with guys like you, with Jirnexu, with AWS, we can work together to do some exciting things. Just before I end off, like Moses Lin asked really early on, he's on Facebook, he was asking, is there other supports for startups from AWS? I guess real quick, Denning, do you have any comments from this one? Like any supports for startups that AWS can reach out to you? How can they reach out to you to get support? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, tons. There's I'll drop my email here, right, to anyone who wants to connect. But do searches up online. Just type in AWS startups resources, right? So there's a lot of resource online, and it's explained all there. But happy to take anyone through our various programs. How we have rolled it out in this part of the world, in Malaysia in particular, the way that we work with startups, the way that we work with scale up. We can have a different session on this, but do reach out if you want to, or just look up online as well.
Yeah, Moses also asked us how if Scale Up and AWS are teaming together for the new cohort. The answer is yes. We're going to be working together for cohort 3. How we're going to work together, you got to stay tuned. We'll be announcing it very, very soon. But how we'll be working together. I guess with that, let's wrap up this session. I think maybe I'll invite both Whitey and Denning to give maybe some final thoughts as we close the day out. And as you end the final thoughts, please maybe you can share. And Denning has already. Maybe Whitey, if you people want to reach out to you, what's the best way to reach out to you? Please share that with the audience as well. So we'll start with Whitey and then Denning, and then we'll close off the session.
Sorry, I'm just typing my email into the chat. Just give me a second. Actually, Denning, you want to kick off so I can just paste my email in?
Cool, yeah. Denning, yeah.
Yeah.
Final thoughts on the session, and yeah.
Give me a moment.
Reach out to you.
I'm also putting in something just to make it easy. So yeah, you can click on that link and it explains a lot of what the startup team does and the resources that we have. It's a good pointer to the programs that we run, and also as you reach out to us, you can ask pointed questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
For those who are who are wondering where these links are, we'll be sharing these email addresses as well as the link that Denning just shared in the show notes. Will be in the comment section, or even we'll put it on the screen shortly. So just hang on a second, we'll do that for you. So ending up with you, Denning, final thoughts before we close off the session.
So I haven't really thought about it, but to today's topic on culture, I think what being at Amazon has taught me is that culture is really so crucial to the success of a company. There's a saying here that culture eats strategy for business, for breakfast, sorry, and it's completely true. It's completely true. You can't imagine a company that is so large, running the way that it is, still in very scrappy day one mode, without culture being so strong. So I realized very early on that culture is the glue that that binds us all and makes things happen. So underrated. If you focus on it, you get it right. You make tweaks down the road, and you intentionally carry it out in everything that you do. So in our case, from the point of having a clear and distinct culture, from the point of hiring, the way that we do promotions, even the way that we write our documents, our narratives, the way that we talk in our everyday language, very often points back to our culture and those leadership principles. I mean, these things are really, it sounds very common sense. Things like ownership, like customer obsession, earning trust. These are just normal language. It's common to everyone. It doesn't really matter so much what you put up on the wall, but how you bring them to life. How serious you are in it. How much you believe in those set of values. I think that's what makes all the difference, right? Yeah. So to all the startups out there, all the best in thinking about your culture, and happy to bounce ideas and thoughts. You can just take this offline, and yeah. So thank you to Aaron, and thank you to Whitey.
Thank you. Thanks, Denning. Whitey, final thoughts to those who are listening before we close it off.
No, don't think I can really add anything to Denning. I mean, I think maybe just a random side note. I think one of the things I've enjoyed reading the most, and I like to read over and over again, are the Amazon shareholder letters, which Jeff Bezos writes every year. And when you talk about, does culture change, or do priorities change? And it's one thing that's so striking is that in the, I don't know how many years, it's over 20 years, right? Over 20 years that he's been CEO.
Yeah.
And writing these letters, it's the same things over and over again, right? He's so consistent and persistent. So as just a side note, when you think about culture and principles, there's so much value in those Amazon shareholder letters.
Thanks, Whitey. Guys, it's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed having this last hour, 10 minutes or so with you guys. So thank you, Denning Tan, Startup Lead for AWS, and thank you, Whitey, co-founder and group CEO over at Jirnexu. Thanks for joining us today. To everyone
Thank
here
you.
who's joined us, thank you also for spending the last hour with us. We hope you've enjoyed the session. And if you'd like to learn more about Scale Up Malaysia, check out our website at www.scaleup.my. We're starting the next cohort very, very soon. So follow us on all our social media platforms for updated news and know what's happening with us. Till next time, have a nice evening. We'll see you later. Goodbye.
Okay.
Bye.
Cheers.